The alien princess's chambers. The distant hum of thrusters echoed faintly as Ethan's shuttle docked with the diplomatic space station. Outside the narrow viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, a silent witness to the vastness of the galaxy. Ethan adjusted his toolkit and stepped into the brightly lit docking bay, where tension was palpable. The air buzzed with the hurried footsteps of officials and technicians, their faces marked by stress. "Engineer Ethan Carter," a stern voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. Turning, he faced a tall, uniformed man with sharp eyes and an air of authority. "That's me," Ethan replied, trying to shake off the unease settling over him. "I'm Captain Rail," the man said curtly. "We're grateful you answered our call. Follow me, time is critical." Ethan fell into step behind Rail, his boots echoing in the metallic corridors. The station was a marvel of design, a fusion of human and alien craftsmanship. Walls shimmered faintly, etched with patterns that seemed alive. It wasn't just a station, it was a symbol of unity, a fragile alliance between Earth and the Tyrant Empire. But something had gone terribly wrong here. As they walked, Rail briefed him. "The station's core systems have been destabilizing for days, environmental controls, communication grids, everything. It's escalating. We suspect sabotage." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Sabotage? You think someone's targeting the station?" "We don't know yet," Rail admitted. "But the timing is suspicious. The Tyrant Empire's representative is aboard, Princess Naira. Her chambers are directly above the core. You'll start there." Ethan's stomach tightened. Working near alien royalty wasn't part of his usual scope of work. Before he could protest, they reached a control room bustling with activity. Holographic displays flashed error codes while a team of technicians frantically attempted to stabilize the systems. "Fix this," Rail ordered. "Anything you need, you'll get it." Ethan rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The console before him hummed as his fingers moved swiftly, running diagnostics. But the data made no sense, signals spiked and dropped erratically, as if an invisible hand was interfering. "It's not just a malfunction," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Someone's definitely tampered with this." His suspicion deepened when he noticed a strange energy signature buried in the core's system logs. It wasn't human, and it didn't match the Tyrant technology specifications he'd been briefed on. Before he could fully investigate, the door slid open behind him. "Engineer Carter," Rail announced. "This is Princess Naira." Ethan turned, expecting an air of arrogance or indifference. Instead, he found himself face to face with a regal figure whose presence was both commanding and graceful. Naira's pale violet skin glowed faintly under the station's lights, her intricate silver robes flowing like liquid metal. Her eyes, a striking shade of deep amethyst, studied him with curiosity and just a hint of suspicion. "You are the one tasked with fixing this mess." Her voice was melodic, but there was an edge to it. Ethan fumbled for words. "Yes, Your Highness. I specialize in systems engineering." "Good," she replied curtly. "Because if this station fails, so does our alliance." The weight of her words pressed on him. This wasn't just a technical issue, it was political, a delicate thread holding two civilizations together. Naira's gaze softened slightly as she added, "My chambers are near the core systems. If you need access, inform me. But tread carefully, engineer. There are things in my quarters that do not concern humans." Ethan nodded, unsure of what to make of her warning. Hours later, Ethan found himself in Naira's chambers. The air was different here, warmer, almost alive. The walls pulsed faintly, emitting soft hues that shifted as he moved. It felt as though the room was watching him. He approached a panel near the floor, where his scanner had detected an unusual signal. Kneeling, he pried it open, revealing a sleek, foreign device embedded in the circuitry. Its surface was smooth, almost organic, and it emitted a faint hum. "What is that?" Naira's voice startled him. She stood just behind him, her expression unreadable. Ethan held the device up carefully. It's not human, and not Tyran either. Someone planted this here. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine concern on her face. A saboteur. But why target my chambers? That's what I intend to find out, Ethan replied. But if this thing is broadcasting, we're not alone. Whoever did this knows we found it. Naira's expression hardened. Then we act quickly. There's no room for failure, engineer. For the first time, Ethan realized this mission wasn't just about fixing systems. It was about uncovering a threat that could tear apart the fragile alliance, and possibly much more. As he worked to disarm the device, the shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at the edge of his mind. Something, or someone, was watching. And they weren't done yet. The shadow in the systems. Ethan tightened the last wire in his disarmament setup, his breath steady despite the faint hum of the device in his hands. The foreign tech, sleek and unnervingly precise, had an almost predatory feel to it. Every pulse of light from its surface seemed calculated, intentional. Behind him, Princess Naira paced with a regal calmness that betrayed the tension in her sharp amethyst eyes. "Will it detonate?" she asked softly, standing close enough for him to feel the weight of her presence. Ethan shook his head, his voice low. "Not likely. But it's not just a transmitter. This thing is redirecting energy, almost siphoning it. It's destabilizing the core deliberately." Naira frowned, her violet skin catching the faint light of the room. "You're certain this wasn't Tyran sabotage?" "I've worked with Tyran systems before," Ethan replied, setting the device down on a heat-resistant surface. "This doesn't match anything I've seen. It's deliberate. Precise. And far too advanced for most of us to understand." Naira knelt beside him, her elegant demeanor unshaken by the alien device inches from her. "If this is targeting the station and the Alliance, we may already be out of time. Whoever planted this didn't expect you to find it so quickly. They might act again." The words lingered in the charged air. Before Ethan could respond, the device emitted a faint, high-pitched whine. His scanner lit up with erratic signals. "What's it doing?" Naira demanded, her voice sharp. Ethan's fingers flew across his toolkit. "It's sending out a burst signal, like a distress call." Naira's face tightened. "To whom?" Ethan didn't have the answer, but before either of them could act, the station's emergency alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the chamber as the mechanical voice of the station's AI announced in monotone, "Core destabilization imminent. Evacuate critical zones immediately." Ethan's heart sank. He looked at Naira. "This isn't random. Someone's triggering a system-wide failure." Minutes later, the control room was a storm of chaos. Captain Rail barked orders at technicians scrambling to restore stability. Holographic displays projected cascading system failures, each one spreading closer to the core. Ethan pushed through the crowd, Naira close on his heels. "We found another device," he said, loud enough to cut through the noise. "It sent out a signal right before this started." Rail's jaw tightened as he spun to face them. "Another one? Where?" "Her Highness's chambers," Ethan replied, glancing at Naira. The captain froze for a fraction of a second, his sharp gaze darting between the two of them. So, this was deliberate. Naira stepped forward, her voice like steel. "Whoever planted these devices wanted chaos. They're not targeting me, they're targeting the Alliance." A technician interrupted, his face pale. "Sir, we're detecting power spikes across 3 more sections. If we don't shut them down, the core could overload." Rail nodded sharply. "Divide into teams. We'll take the lower decks." "Engineer Carter." "I'm going with him," Naira interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Your Highness, Rael began, this is too dangerous. And yet here I am, she countered, her gaze unwavering. If this is sabotage, it's aimed at everything my people and yours are trying to build. I will not hide while it burns. Ethan gave Rael a subtle nod. I could use the help. She's got better knowledge of Tyran tech than I do. Reluctantly, Rael relented. Fine. But if anything happens to her. Nothing will, Ethan said firmly. We'll handle it. The maintenance deck was a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the rest of the station. Shadows clung to the narrow corridors, and the only sounds were the faint hum of machinery and the distant echo of footsteps. The air here was heavy, almost stifling, as though the station itself was holding its breath. Ethan followed his scanner's readings, its faint beeping leading them deeper into the labyrinth of pipes and conduits. Naira walked beside him, her every movement graceful but alert. Behind them, 2 Tyran guards flanked the group, their expressions unreadable beneath their helmets. Why would anyone do this? Naira asked quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her. Sabotage is usually about power. Maybe they think if the alliance fails, one side will weaken enough to exploit. Naira shook her head. But this level of sophistication, it doesn't feel like the work of a rogue faction. This feels calculated, surgical. Before Ethan could respond, the scanner's beeping quickened. They stopped in front of a sealed hatch, the edges glowing faintly with residual heat. Here, Ethan said, kneeling to inspect the panel. Whatever's behind this door, it's giving off the same signature as the device in your chambers. Naira stepped closer, her expression hard. Can you open it? Ethan nodded, pulling out a small tool. Give me a second. The hatch hissed open, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with tangled wires and power nodes. In the center, another device sat embedded in a junction box, its surface pulsing with the same eerie rhythm. Naira's voice was low. That's it. Ethan approached cautiously. And it's wired directly into the power grid. If I disarm it wrong, it could fry the entire station. Can you do it? Naira asked, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Ethan swallowed hard. I'll have to. But we need to be ready for anything. As he began to work, the shadows around them seemed to shift. A faint sound, like metal scraping against metal, echoed from somewhere deeper in the maintenance deck. Naira stiffened, her sharp eyes scanning the corridor behind them. We're not alone. Ethan didn't look up. Keep them off me. I need time. The faint scrape grew louder, accompanied by the low whir of mechanical movement. The guards raised their weapons, their alien rifles glowing faintly in the dim light. Stay focused, Carter, Naira said, her voice calm but firm. Ethan worked as quickly as he could, his tools sparking faintly as he navigated the alien wiring. The tension in the air was thick, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, the device's hum began to fade. Ethan exhaled shakily. Got it. But there's one more thing. Before he could finish, the shadows at the edge of the room moved, and a figure emerged. Its silhouette was humanoid but unmistakably alien, its body covered in sleek armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian. The guards raised their weapons, and the figure stepped forward, its voice a distorted growl. Step away from the device. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Naira stepped in front of him, her posture defiant. This station is under our protection. Surrender now, or face the consequences. The figure tilted its head, the faint glow of its helmet intensifying. Your protection means nothing. The alliance will fall. And with that, chaos erupted. The hidden threat. The maintenance deck plunged into chaos as the armored figure lunged forward, its movements unnaturally fast. A pulse of energy erupted from its wrist-mounted device, scattering the guards like leaves in a storm. Ethan barely had time to duck as the blast seared past him, slamming into the wall with a thunderous crack. Naira reacted instantly, her regal composure giving way to fierce determination. She moved with fluid precision, drawing a slender, glowing blade from the folds of her robe. Its edge shimmered with an intensity that seemed to hum with her heartbeat. "Stay down," she ordered Ethan, her voice sharp but controlled. Ethan scrambled behind a console, clutching the now silent sabotage device. His mind raced as he pieced together what he had seen. This wasn't just an act of sabotage, this was an attack from an enemy with resources far beyond anything he had expected. Naira faced the intruder head-on, her blade weaving through the air like a streak of silver fire. The armored figure countered with brutal efficiency, its gauntlet emitting sharp bursts of energy that left scorch marks on the metallic floor. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed, each blow reverberating through the confined space. Ethan's eyes darted to the device in his hands. If this thing was tied into the station's systems, maybe it could still be used to disable the attacker. His fingers fumbled with the casing, prying it open to expose a labyrinth of circuits and alien components. The guards recovered and joined the fray, their energy rifles firing precise bursts at the intruder. The figure moved with almost unnatural agility, dodging and deflecting their shots. It was clear this wasn't an ordinary saboteur, it was something far deadlier. Naira sidestepped a blast, her blade carving a glowing arc through the air. "Carter, whatever you're doing, do it faster." "I'm trying." Ethan snapped, his voice strained. He connected his scanner to the device, the holographic interface springing to life. Data flooded the screen, patterns of alien code that pulsed like a heartbeat. "This thing's got a secondary function, it's controlling something else on the station." "What do you mean?" Naira demanded, parrying another strike. Ethan's fingers flew across the interface. "It's not just sabotage, it's a gateway. Someone's using this to infiltrate the station's systems. If I can reverse the signal." He didn't finish the sentence. The implications were clear. Whoever controlled this device could control the station. The armored figure suddenly shifted focus, its helmet snapping toward Ethan as though sensing the threat. It raised its arm, the gauntlet charging with a menacing glow. "Get down!" Naira shouted, moving faster than he thought possible. She threw herself in front of him, her blade intercepting the blast in a shower of sparks. The force of the impact sent her stumbling, but she held her ground. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he worked frantically. The device's interface flickered and shifted, the alien code resisting his attempts to rewrite it. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Naira steadied herself, her voice cold and steady. "You've chosen the wrong enemy. Leave now, or you'll regret it." The intruder's distorted voice replied, dripping with disdain. "You're already too late. The Alliance is doomed." Ethan's screen suddenly stabilized, the alien code falling into recognizable patterns. "Got it," he exclaimed. "I'm reversing the signal, it should neutralize their control." He pressed a final command, and the device emitted a high-pitched whine. The armored figure froze mid-attack, its movements jerky and unnatural as though something had severed its connection to its surroundings. Naira didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her blade slicing cleanly through the intruder's gauntlet. Sparks erupted as the weapon shattered, and the figure staggered back, disoriented. "Now," she barked at the guards. The Tyran guards surged forward, their energy rifles unleashing a coordinated barrage. The intruder tried to retreat, but the combined assault overwhelmed its defenses. With a final, deafening explosion, the armored figure collapsed, smoke rising from its shattered armor. Ethan slumped against the console, his hands shaking. "Is it dead?" Naira approached cautiously, her blade still glowing faintly. She prodded the figure with her foot, ensuring it was no longer a threat. "No. But it's neutralized for now." One of the guards moved to secure the figure, but Naira raised a hand to stop him. "Leave it. We need answers, and it might still be useful." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, his breath coming in shallow gasps. That was intense. Naira turned to him, her expression softening slightly. You did well, Carter. Without you, we wouldn't have had a chance. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly a fighter, Ethan replied with a weak chuckle. But I'd really like to know who sent that thing. Naira's gaze hardened, her voice laced with resolve. So would I. And we will find out. Back in the control room, Ethan reviewed the data he had extracted from the device. The patterns were unmistakable, encrypted signals originating from outside the station, transmitted through the devices planted on board. This wasn't random, he said, addressing Naira and Captain Rail. This was coordinated. Whoever's behind this has resources, and they're targeting both of our people. Rail nodded grimly. Then we're dealing with more than just saboteurs. This is an act of war. Naira's expression was unreadable, her violet eyes fixed on the holographic display. If that's true, then we have to prepare. Whatever they wanted, they failed. But they won't stop here. Ethan glanced at her, his voice low but firm. Then we need to make sure they don't get another chance. The room fell silent, the weight of their situation sinking in. They had survived the first attack, but the battle was far from over. Somewhere out there, an enemy was watching, waiting for their next move. And Ethan had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The enemy revealed. The control room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the holographic displays. Ethan's hands hovered over the console, his eyes scanning the streams of alien code. Each line told a story, one he wasn't sure he wanted to finish. Naira stood beside him, her gaze sharp and unyielding, while Captain Rail paced like a caged predator behind them. This encryption isn't just advanced. It's a signature, Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. He leaned closer to the glowing display, pointing to a sequence of pulsing symbols. Whoever sent that saboteur wanted us to know it was them. Naira tilted her head slightly, her silver braids catching the light. A warning? Or arrogance? Could be both, Ethan muttered. But these signals, they're originating from outside Tyran and human territories. This isn't from anyone we've encountered before. Rail stopped pacing, his arms folded tightly. You're saying this is a new player? Another faction? Not just a faction, Ethan replied, his tone grim. An organized, resourceful one. And they've been watching us for a while. Naira's expression hardened. Then it's time we stopped reacting and started asking questions. The prison chamber was as sterile and cold as the maintenance deck had been suffocating. The armored intruder sat restrained in the center of the room, its sleek obsidian armor scorched but intact. Despite the damage, the figure exuded an air of menace, its helmet tilted just enough to suggest defiance. Ethan stood at the edge of the chamber, his heart pounding. I'm not a fan of interrogations, he muttered under his breath. Naira shot him a glance. We're not here to torture anyone, engineer. We're here for answers. Captain Rail stepped forward, his voice a sharp blade. You infiltrated this station. You endangered the lives of everyone aboard. Why? The figure remained silent, its distorted breathing the only sound in the room. Rail's patience snapped. He slammed a fist against the wall, the noise echoing. Who do you work for? Still, no answer. Ethan's fingers twitched at his sides. Wait, he said suddenly, stepping closer. You're not saying anything because you don't need to, do you? That device, the one I disarmed, it already sent your message. The figure's helmet tilted slightly toward him, a small but undeniable acknowledgement. Ethan swallowed hard. You knew we'd find it. You wanted us to. Naira's voice was cold and steady. What message? To whom? Finally, the figure spoke, its voice a low, mechanical growl. To the ones who matter. Your alliance is a facade. You cling to unity out of desperation, but cracks are inevitable. We're just helping them widen. Naira stepped forward, her blade drawn but unlit. Who are you? What do you want? The figure tilted its head again, almost mocking. We are inevitability. You are interference. And interference must be eradicated. Rael's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Naira raised a hand to stop him. We're not killing anyone, she said firmly. Not yet. Ethan frowned, stepping closer to the restrained figure. If you're so inevitable, why bother with sabotage? Why not just attack outright? The figure's silence was answer enough. It wasn't confidence, it was hesitation. They weren't ready for an outright assault, not yet. This was the groundwork, the opening move in a larger game. And they had just revealed themselves too early. Back in the control room, Ethan paced nervously as data from the disarmed device streamed across the holographic displays. Naira stood silently nearby, her presence a calming counterpoint to his growing unease. They're testing us, Ethan said, breaking the quiet. Probing for weaknesses. They want to see how far they can push before we break. Naira's voice was soft but resolute. Then we must show them we won't. Ethan stopped pacing, turning to face her. We need to find out where they're operating from. If we can trace the signal back to its source. We'd be walking into a trap, Rael interrupted, entering the room. His expression was dark. They want us to react. That's why they left the devices intact. Naira crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. A trap, perhaps. But we can't afford to wait for them to strike again. Rael hesitated, his jaw tightening. And if it's a diversion? If this is meant to pull us away from the station? Then we prepare for both, Naira replied firmly. We can't let fear dictate our actions. Ethan's fingers hovered over the console, his mind racing. He hated the idea of walking into the unknown, but Naira was right. Waiting only gave the enemy more time to plan. I'll need more data, he said finally. If I can triangulate the signal source, we'll know exactly where to look. Rael nodded reluctantly. Do it. But if this goes sideways, it's on you. Hours later, Ethan stared at the holographic map projected before him. A faint red marker pulsed on the edge of the galactic map, far beyond the reach of known human or Tyrant territories. That's it, he said, his voice low. The source of the signal. Naira leaned closer, her amethyst eyes narrowing. A barren sector. No colonies, no stations. Why there? Because it's the last place anyone would look, Ethan replied. Perfect for hiding an operation like this. Rael studied the map, his arms folded. If we go there, we're blind. No backup, no support. Naira's voice was quiet but unshakable. Then we make sure we're ready. Ethan felt the weight of her words. The enemy had shown its hand, but the next move was theirs. And he had a sinking feeling it was going to be the most dangerous one yet. Into the shadows. The ship's engines thrummed with a steady rhythm as it cut through the cold void of space. Ethan sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands gripping the armrests tighter than he cared to admit. The red marker on the navigation screen pulsed ominously, a stark reminder of the mission ahead. The barren sector they were heading toward was nothing more than a dark blotch on the galactic map, its secrets hidden in the vast silence. Beside him, Princess Naira sat with an air of calm that Ethan envied. Her gaze was fixed on the star-speckled expanse outside the viewport, her violet eyes reflecting an intensity that suggested she was already preparing for the confrontation. You've been quiet, Ethan said, breaking the heavy silence. Naira didn't turn, but her voice was thoughtful. I'm considering our enemy. They're precise, calculating. This isn't the work of an opportunist. Whoever they are, they've invested resources and time into destabilizing the alliance. Ethan nodded. And they're good at it. The devices, the sabotage, the attack on the station, it was all coordinated. They wanted to see how we'd respond. Naira turned to him, her expression sharp. And now we see how they respond when the hunted become the hunters. Captain Rail's voice crackled through the ship's comms. Approaching the coordinates. Everyone stay alert. The small team on board shifted in their seats. 2 Tyran soldiers checked their gear, their movements efficient and practiced. Ethan felt like an outsider among them, his toolkit slung awkwardly over his shoulder in contrast to their sleek weaponry. He was an engineer, not a soldier, and the thought of walking into the unknown was enough to make his stomach churn. As the ship dropped out of warp, the barren sector came into view. It was a dead zone, a black void devoid of stars or planets. But as they approached the coordinates, something unexpected materialized. A station, hidden in the darkness. It was massive, its angular design a stark contrast to the flowing architecture of Tyran or human creations. Its surface bristled with sensors and weapon emplacements, and faint blue energy fields shimmered around its structure like a protective cocoon. Ethan leaned closer to the viewport, his heart pounding. That's not what I expected. Naira stood behind him, her expression unreadable. Nor I. It's a fortress. Rail's voice cut through the tension. Sensors are picking up defensive systems. If we get any closer, they'll detect us. Ethan's mind raced. What about the signal? Can we pinpoint where it's originating from on the station? Naira's hand rested lightly on the back of his chair. We didn't come this far to turn back. If we can't go unnoticed, then we'll have to make them notice us. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you suggesting we go in guns blazing? Not quite, Naira replied with a faint smile. But we will need a distraction. Minutes later, the ship slipped into a stealth trajectory, its systems running on minimal power to avoid detection. Ethan and Naira stood in the cramped operations bay, where a holographic map of the enemy station flickered above the table. The signal's coming from here, Ethan said, pointing to a central node deep within the station. If we can access their mainframe, we might be able to shut down their defenses. Rail nodded. And how do we get inside without being obliterated? Naira stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the tension. We split into 2 teams. One creates a diversion, something loud enough to draw their attention. The other infiltrates the core and shuts down their systems. Ethan glanced at her. Let me guess. I'm on the second team. You're the only one who can handle the tech, Naira replied. And I'll be with you. Rail's disapproval was evident, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to the soldiers. You 2 are with me. We'll handle the diversion. As they prepared, Ethan couldn't shake the growing weight of responsibility. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's operation, and every decision felt like a gamble. He caught Naira watching him, her expression softer than he expected. Do you doubt we'll succeed? She asked. Ethan hesitated. Doubt is what keeps me focused. But I can't lie, I'm not exactly built for this kind of thing. Naira's lips curved into a faint smile. And yet, here you are. That says more than you think. The station loomed larger as the ship approached. Rail's team launched first, their small pod hurtling toward the outer hull of the fortress. Moments later, explosions rippled across one of the station's docking bays, illuminating the void in bursts of fire and light. Looks like they've got their attention, Ethan muttered. Naira's voice was calm but firm. Then it's our turn. Their pod detached and maneuvered toward a maintenance airlock on the station's underside. The ride was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the pod systems. As they docked, Ethan's palms were slick with sweat. The airlock opened with a hiss, revealing a narrow corridor dimly lit by flickering lights. Ethan followed Naira closely, his toolkit slung across his back. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the station systems. "This way," Naira said, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved quickly, following the signal trace deeper into the station. The architecture was alien, its sharp angles and reflective surfaces creating disorienting patterns. Ethan felt like he was walking through a maze designed to unsettle intruders. As they rounded a corner, Naira held up a hand, stopping him. Ahead, two armored figures stood guard, their helmets identical to the intruder they had encountered on the diplomatic station. Ethan's breath caught. What now? Naira's blade ignited with a faint hum. "Stay behind me." With a fluid motion, she stepped into the corridor. The guards reacted instantly, raising their weapons, but Naira was faster. Her blade moved in an elegant arc, deflecting their shots as she closed the distance. Ethan ducked behind a console, his heart racing as he heard the clash of metal and the sharp crackle of energy. Moments later, the corridor fell silent. Naira stood over the fallen guards, her blade extinguished. "Let's keep moving." Ethan nodded, his admiration for her growing. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was a warrior. As they approached the central node, Ethan's scanner beeped, signaling they were close. The door to the control room slid open, revealing a vast chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. Ethan's relief was short-lived. Standing in the center of the room, waiting for them, was another armored figure, this one larger and more imposing than any they had encountered before. "So," the figure said, its voice a chilling distortion. "You've come to witness your failure." Naira raised her blade, her stance unwavering. "We'll see whose failure this is." The figure stepped forward, and the room's lights dimmed, casting long shadows. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized one thing. This was no ordinary opponent. The confrontation. The control room was a symphony of pulsating lights and humming machinery, its air charged with tension. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his gaze locked on the towering figure before them. The armored adversary exuded an aura of authority and menace, its sleek, black armor seeming to absorb the dim light. Its helmet was smooth and featureless, save for a glowing slit where eyes should have been, a line of burning crimson. "You've made it farther than I expected," the figure said, its voice a deep, mechanical growl that seemed to resonate within the walls. "Impressive. But futile." Naira stepped forward, her glowing blade casting faint shadows across the room. She moved with the calculated grace of someone who had faced death before and survived. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. "And why are you targeting the Alliance?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as though amused. "You stand on the precipice of history, Princess Naira. Your fragile alliance is a mistake. We are here to correct it." Ethan's voice broke through the tension, shaky but determined. "By sabotage? Killing innocent people? That's your idea of correction?" The figure's glowing slit flickered. "A few sacrifices are necessary to prevent greater chaos. Unity between your species is unnatural. Dangerous." Naira's blade twitched in her hand. "Dangerous to whom?" "You." Before the figure could respond, the room shuddered violently, the vibration sending ripples through the holographic displays. Ethan stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a console. A warning message flashed across the nearest screen. "Core destabilization at 85%. Ethan's blood ran cold. "They're destabilizing the station's core remotely. If it reaches critical, this whole place will blow." The figure turned its helmeted gaze toward Ethan. "Exactly. And you won't stop it." Naira didn't wait for the figure to act. With a burst of speed, she closed the distance, her blade slashing in a radiant arc. The figure moved to counter, its gauntlet igniting with crackling energy. Sparks flew as their weapons collided, the impact reverberating through the chamber. Ethan ducked behind a console, his fingers fumbling to activate his scanner. His mind raced as he worked to override the core's destabilization sequence. Lines of alien code scrolled rapidly across his display, a puzzle he had to solve in mere minutes. The clash of combat filled the room. Naira's strikes were precise and relentless, her blade cutting through the air with deadly intent. But the figure was equally skilled, its movements fluid and calculated. It fought with an efficiency that spoke of experience, each counterstrike forcing Naira to adjust her stance. "You fight well," the figure said, its voice tinged with something almost resembling respect. "But your efforts are meaningless. The alliance will crumble." Naira didn't respond. Her blade flared brighter as she pressed the attack, her strikes growing faster and more forceful. But the figure seemed to anticipate her every move, its gauntlet crackling with energy as it deflected her blows. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. "Naira. I need more time." She didn't take her eyes off her opponent. "Then take it." The figure lunged, its gauntlet aimed directly at Ethan. Naira intercepted the attack, her blade slicing through the air and knocking the gauntlet aside. Sparks erupted, and the figure staggered back, its armor smoking from the impact. "You will not touch him," Naira said, her voice low and fierce. Ethan's hands flew over the controls, his mind a blur of calculations. The core's destabilization was accelerating, and the alien encryption fought back against his every command. He had to think faster, smarter. Then he saw it, a weakness in the code, a backdoor left open by whoever had designed the sabotage system. A chance. "Got you," Ethan muttered, his fingers racing to exploit the vulnerability. The figure seemed to sense his progress. It broke away from Naira, turning its attention toward Ethan. "Stop him," it roared, its mechanical voice reverberating through the chamber. Naira moved to intercept again, but the figure unleashed a shockwave from its gauntlet, sending her sprawling across the room. She hit the ground hard, her blade clattering from her grasp. Ethan barely had time to react before the figure loomed over him, its gauntlet sparking ominously. "You should have stayed out of this, human." Ethan swallowed hard, his heart hammering in his chest. But instead of backing down, he met the figure's gaze, or where its gaze should have been. "Yeah, well, I'm not great at taking advice." With a sudden movement, Ethan yanked a tool from his belt, a high-voltage conductor, and jammed it into the figure's gauntlet. Electricity surged, and the figure staggered back, its armor sparking and smoking. Naira was back on her feet in an instant. Her blade reignited, and she charged forward, her movements a blur of silver and violet. She struck with unrelenting force, her blade cutting through the weakened armor. The figure faltered, its defenses crumbling under her assault. Ethan turned back to the console, his fingers flying. Come on, he muttered, his focus narrowing to the critical task at hand. Finally, the screen flashed green. Core stabilization sequence activated. "It's done," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. Naira's blade struck one final blow, piercing the figure's chest plate. It staggered backward, sparks cascading from its armor. With a guttural growl, it collapsed to its knees, the glow in its helmet dimming. "You cannot stop what's coming," it rasped before falling silent. The room went still. The core's hum grew steady once more, and the flickering light stabilized. Ethan slumped against the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Naira approached the fallen figure, her blade still lit. "Whoever sent you will learn that we are not so easily broken." Ethan managed a weak grin. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." She turned to him, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "You did well, Carter. Without you, none of this would have been possible." As they stood there, the weight of their victory sinking in, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the enemy's words were more than just bravado. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The final reckoning. The lights of the enemy station flickered erratically, as if the structure itself was aware of its impending demise. Ethan stood at the console, staring at the cryptic final messages left by the dying system. His pulse pounded in his ears as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing, a countdown. Naira, still gripping her glowing blade, stepped forward. Her violet eyes swept over the holographic display. "What is it?" Ethan's voice was grim. "A fail-safe. The entire station is rigged to self-destruct. Whoever designed this place didn't want anyone finding out too much." A low, mechanical groan echoed through the chamber as the station began to shudder. Warning klaxons blared, and the ominous red countdown appeared on every available screen, 9 minutes and 59 seconds. 10 minutes, Ethan muttered. "We've got 10 minutes to get out of here." Captain Rail's voice crackled through the comms. "We've secured the docking bay, but defenses are activating across the station. If you're coming, move now." Naira's gaze hardened. "We're on our way." The corridors of the enemy station had become a labyrinth of chaos. Automated turrets emerged from hidden panels, spitting streams of plasma down the hallways. Ethan ducked behind a corner as a burst of energy seared past him, narrowly missing his head. "This is insane," he shouted, gripping his toolkit like a lifeline. Naira moved with practiced precision, her blade slicing through the turrets with ease. "Stay close," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The shuddering of the station grew more violent, and the air seemed thicker, charged with static. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the significance of what they'd uncovered. The sabotage, the cryptic words of the armored figure, the self-destruct sequence, it all pointed to something far larger than this single station. "They wanted us to find this place," Ethan said as they sprinted down a corridor. "This whole thing was a trap. But not just for us, it's a message." Naira glanced at him as they rounded a corner. "A message to whom?" "To everyone," Ethan replied, his breath ragged. "They're showing us what they're capable of." This wasn't just about the Alliance, it was about fear. Before Naira could respond, another turret deployed ahead of them. Ethan froze, but Naira didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, she leapt forward, her blade cleaving through the turret in a single strike. Sparks flew, and the turret collapsed, smoldering. "Move," she said, pulling Ethan forward. "We don't have time to analyze their motives." The docking bay was a scene of chaos. Rail and his team were pinned down behind cargo containers, their weapons barely holding back the swarm of automated drones descending from the rafters. The hum of energy weapons filled the air, punctuated by the sharp crack of explosions. "Carter!" Rail barked as he spotted them. "We need those shields down, now." Ethan's eyes darted to the far end of the bay, where an energy shield shimmered, blocking access to their ship. A control panel flickered beside it, and his heart sank. It was heavily guarded. "Of course it's never easy," he muttered, dropping his toolkit and sprinting toward the panel. Naira followed, her blade cutting a path through the drones. Ethan reached the panel and immediately began working, his fingers flying over the controls. The encryption was dense, but he'd seen enough of their systems by now to recognize patterns. "Just a little more," he muttered, beads of sweat forming on his brow. The station's countdown echoed in his ears, 3 minutes and 45 seconds. "Carter!" Rail shouted. "We're running out of time." "Yeah, I noticed." Ethan snapped, his fingers trembling as he bypassed the final security layer. With a triumphant beep, the shield flickered and dropped. "Go!" Ethan shouted. "Get to the ship." Rail's team surged forward, covering Naira and Ethan as they sprinted toward the waiting vessel. The station groaned, metal twisting under the strain of the imminent explosion. They reached the ship just as the countdown hit 1 minute. The ramp slammed shut behind them, and Ethan collapsed into a seat, his chest heaving. "Punch it!" Rail shouted to the pilot. The engines roared to life, and the ship shot out of the docking bay, leaving the crumbling station behind. Through the viewport, Ethan watched as the station imploded, collapsing in on itself before erupting into a brilliant explosion that lit up the void of space. The silence that followed was deafening. Back on the diplomatic station, the gravity of their mission began to settle in. Ethan sat in the debriefing chamber, staring at the holographic data they'd recovered. It was incomplete, fragmented by the destruction of the enemy station, but it was enough to paint a chilling picture. This wasn't their only facility, he said, his voice low. There are more stations like this. More operations. They've been watching us for years. Naira stood beside him, her expression unreadable. And they'll come again. Ethan nodded. Yeah. But now we know what to look for. Rael entered the chamber, his presence commanding as always. The Alliance is already preparing a response. We'll hit them before they hit us again. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. It's not just about hitting them. We need to understand them. Their motives, their weaknesses. If we don't, we're just playing their game. Naira placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. You've done more than anyone could have asked, Carter. Without you, the Alliance might not have survived this day. He looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Guess I'm not just a wrench jockey after all. Naira smiled faintly, her amethyst eyes glinting. No, you're much more than that. As the three of them stood together, the weight of what they'd uncovered hung heavy in the air. The enemy had revealed itself, but the battle was far from over. Somewhere in the galaxy, shadows gathered, plotting their next move. And humanity, alongside its newfound allies, would be ready.